I want you to imagine something simple. Imagine you are standing in a quiet room. You can hear your own breathing. You can feel your heartbeat. And in front of you, someone is waiting. They are waiting for you to speak. They are waiting for you to say something important. Maybe it is something you did not want to say. Maybe it is something you have been avoiding for weeks. Maybe it is something that feels heavy inside your chest. And at that moment, in that quiet room, you understand a simple truth. Difficult conversations do not start with words. They start with emotions. They start with a feeling inside your body. They start with the deep breath you take before you say something honest. This is the beginning of every difficult conversation. And today, in this story, we will walk through this moment together. I will guide you through one long day in the life of a man named Daniel, a man who must face a difficult conversation he never wanted to have. And as you follow his journey, you will practice listening, understanding, and feeling English slowly, gently, and naturally. This is what we do here in Mr. English Lab. We take simple language and use it to explore real human emotions. We learn English not only with the mind, but also with the heart. So now, let me take you into Daniel's day, where everything seems normal, but one small moment changes everything. Daniel woke up earlier than usual that morning. He opened his eyes slowly, like a man who already knew the day would not be easy. His room felt cold, not because the weather was different, but because his thoughts were. He sat up on the edge of his bed and rubbed his hands together. He tried to calm himself. He knew he had to talk to someone today. And not just talk. He had to tell someone the truth. The real truth. The truth he had been hiding. The truth he hoped would disappear if he pretended long enough. But today, he could not pretend anymore. Today, the truth was sitting inside him like a weight. Heavy. Solid. Unmoving. He got out of bed, walked slowly to the kitchen, and boiled some water for tea. The sound of the boiling water filled the silence, and Daniel watched the steam rise with a strange sadness. He whispered to himself, "It's time. I can't avoid this anymore." His voice sounded weak, even to his own ears. He took a deep breath and tried to imagine the conversation he would have later. Every version he imagined felt wrong. Too harsh. Too soft. Too complicated. Too emotional. He wondered why human communication was so difficult. Why truth was so heavy. Why feelings were so hard to hold in your hands. As he sat at the table with his tea, Daniel thought about the person he needed to talk to. Her name was Maya. She was someone he cared about. Someone he respected. Someone who trusted him. And that trust was the very reason the conversation felt so difficult. Because difficult conversations usually happen between people who matter to each other. They happen when something important is at risk. They happen when you have to choose between comfort and honesty. And deep down, Daniel knew he had made a mistake. Not a mistake that would destroy everything, but a mistake that still mattered. Something he should have told Maya sooner. Something that would hurt her a little. Something that would make her doubt him, at least for a moment. And Daniel hated that feeling, the feeling of disappointing someone. The feeling of letting someone down. But he also knew that silence would hurt her more. Silence always grows harder with time. Silence becomes a wall. Silence becomes a shadow. Silence becomes a secret that changes the way you look at someone. And Daniel did not want that. Not with Maya. He finished his tea slowly, as if the warm drink could give him courage. Then he got ready for work, put on his jacket, and stepped outside. The morning air felt fresh and almost too calm. It was the kind of morning where everything looked peaceful, but inside Daniel, nothing felt peaceful. He walked down the street with heavy steps. He noticed the trees, the soft sound of cars passing by, the friendly wave from his neighbor. But none of it comforted him. He felt trapped in his own thoughts. What if she gets angry? He asked himself. What if she stops trusting me? What if this changes everything? These thoughts kept circling in his mind like slow-moving clouds that refused to leave the sky. When he reached the train station, Daniel stood on the platform and watched the train approach. The sound of the train wheels rolling on the metal tracks reminded him of the way time moves, steady, unstoppable, always pushing forward. He stepped inside, found a seat near the window, and leaned his head against the cold glass. He watched the city move past him in soft blurs. Buildings, people, colors, shadows. But nothing could distract him from the conversation waiting ahead. He tried again to imagine how he would start it. Perhaps he would say, "Maya, I need to tell you something important." But no, that sounded too serious, too dramatic. Or maybe, "Hey Maya, do you have a moment? I want to talk about something." But that felt too casual, too normal for something so emotionally heavy. Daniel sighed. He felt stuck. He felt afraid. He felt small. And this is the moment where I want you, the listener, to step inside the story more deeply. Because maybe you have felt this before. Maybe you have faced a difficult conversation at work, at home, with a friend, with a partner, with a family member. Maybe you know this feeling in your stomach. The feeling of wanting to run away, even when you know that talking is the only way forward. And if you know this feeling, then you understand Daniel. You understand why his chest feels tight, why his mind feels full, why his voice feels weak. In English, we often say, honesty is the best policy. But honesty is not always easy. Honesty takes courage. Honesty takes patience. Honesty takes heart. So, as we continue with Daniel's day, I want you to listen not only to the words, but also to the emotion behind the words. This will help you learn English in a deeper way, a more human way. Because difficult conversations are not just about speaking. They're about connecting. When Daniel arrived at work, he sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and tried to focus. But the moment he saw Maya walk into the office, his heart started beating faster. She looked calm and cheerful, unaware that Daniel was carrying something heavy inside him. She smiled at him and said, "Good morning, Daniel." Her voice sounded light, friendly, gentle. And that made everything harder. He wanted to return her smile. He wanted to pretend everything was normal. But he knew he could not. Not today. So he gave her a small, quiet smile and said, "Morning, Maya." His voice did not sound like his own voice. It sounded distant, like someone speaking from behind a closed door. The morning passed slowly. Daniel tried to work, but his mind kept wandering. He imagined the conversation again and again, and every time, it felt different. Sometimes he pictured Maya reacting calmly. Sometimes he pictured her looking disappointed. Sometimes he pictured her walking away. And each version created a new fear inside him. Fear of her reaction. Fear of her emotions. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of saying the right thing, but in the wrong way. Because difficult conversations are not only about honesty. They are also about timing, tone, and care. And Daniel wanted to be careful. He wanted to be gentle. He wanted to be respectful. Around noon, Daniel finally found a little courage. He stood up from his desk, walked over to Maya's table, and said softly, "Hey, do you have a moment later? I want to talk to you about something." Maya looked at him with a curious expression. "Sure," she said. "After lunch." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, after lunch is fine." And just like that, the time was set. The conversation had a place in the day. And the moment Daniel walked away, he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. It was real now. There was no going back. During lunch, Daniel could not eat much. He pushed his food around his plate, his thoughts louder than his appetite. He wondered if Maya noticed something was wrong. She probably did. People can feel tension even when it is silent. And Daniel's tension was no longer small. It was growing, stretching across his entire afternoon like a shadow. After lunch, Daniel returned to his desk and waited. His hands were cold. His mouth felt dry. His heartbeat felt strong and uncomfortable. When Maya walked by his desk and said, "Ready to talk?" Daniel stood up slowly, nodded, and followed her into a quiet meeting room. And now, this is the important part. The moment before the conversation. The moment where silence is heavy. The moment where your chest feels tight. The moment where anything can happen. Daniel sat down across from Maya. He looked at her face and felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear because he knew he was about to open a difficult truth. Relief because he was finally facing it. Finally choosing honesty over avoidance. He took a breath. A long, slow breath. And then he began. But this is where we pause for now. Because this is the end of section 1. And before we continue into the actual conversation, I want you to sit with this feeling. The feeling of waiting. The feeling of preparing. The feeling of choosing courage. This feeling is the heart of every difficult conversation. And understanding this feeling will help you not only improve your English, but also improve your real-life communication. In the next section, we will step directly into the conversation between Daniel and Maya, and we will explore how to handle honesty, conflict, emotion, and connection in English in a natural, gentle, human way. Daniel sat across from Maya in the small meeting room, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. The room felt still, almost too still, like time itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel looked around slowly. The walls were white. The table was simple. The chairs were a little uncomfortable. There was a soft humming sound coming from the air conditioner above them. It was an ordinary room, but the silence between them made it feel heavy, like every object inside it was holding its breath. Maya sat with her hands gently folded on the table. She waited patiently, giving Daniel the space he needed, not rushing him, not pushing him. She was calm, open, curious. But Daniel's heart was not calm. His heart felt like it was trying to run away from his chest. He took a small breath through his nose and let it out slowly, trying to steady himself. He knew this was the moment he had been preparing for all morning. He knew there was no more time to delay. But even knowing that didn't make it easier. Sometimes, the hardest part of any conversation is the very first sentence, the first honest sentence that opens the door to everything that needs to be said. He looked at Maya carefully, trying to find the right words. But the right words didn't come. Instead, what came was a feeling, a deep, human feeling of fear mixed with responsibility. He wanted to speak with care. He wanted to speak with kindness. He wanted to speak with clarity. And so he finally said, in a quiet, gentle voice, "Maya, I need to tell you something I should have told you earlier." The moment he said this, he felt a small shift inside himself. It was like a tight knot in his chest loosened, just a little. Maya nodded more slowly this time. Her expression changed. Her eyes became more serious, more focused, more present. She knew now that this conversation was important. "Okay," she said softly. "I'm listening." Daniel looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. He didn't try to hide it. He allowed the fear to be there. He allowed himself to be vulnerable. Then he started again. "I made a mistake on the project last week. A mistake that affected your part of the work. And at the time, I didn't say anything because I thought I could fix it before you noticed. But I couldn't. And now it's causing problems. And I'm really sorry for not telling you sooner." When the words finally left his mouth, Daniel felt something strange. He felt lighter. Not happy, not relieved, but lighter. The weight of the secret was no longer pressing on his chest. He had placed it on the table between them. He had spoken it aloud. He didn't feel proud of the truth, but he felt honest. And sometimes honesty itself is a quiet kind of strength. Maya did not react immediately. She blinked once slowly. She looked down at the table, then back at Daniel. He could not read her expression. Was she disappointed? Was she angry? Was she hurt? Daniel could not tell. His mind started imagining the worst. But then Maya finally spoke, and her voice surprised him. It was calm. It was careful. It was thoughtful. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I wish you had told me earlier, yes. But I appreciate you being honest with me now." Daniel did not expect those words. He expected frustration. He expected criticism. But Maya's voice carried something gentle, perhaps understanding, perhaps empathy, perhaps a deeper awareness of how difficult honesty can be. She continued, "Can you explain what happened? I want to understand the whole situation." Daniel nodded quickly. He felt thankful for her calm tone. He explained everything slowly, step by step, without hiding anything, without trying to make the mistake look smaller. He told her exactly what he had done, why he had tried to fix it alone, and why he had been afraid to tell her earlier. As he spoke, Maya listened carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not judge. She allowed him to express the whole story. And this, right here, is one of the most important skills in any difficult conversation: listening to understand, not listening to react. Maya gave Daniel space. She gave him silence. She gave him presence. And that made it easier for him to speak honestly. When Daniel finished, Maya leaned back in her chair quietly. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, I understand. The mistake was not small, but it's something we can fix together. What matters now is how we move forward." Daniel felt his eyes sting with emotion. He had expected punishment. He had expected anger. But instead, he received collaboration, support, partnership. And that changed everything inside him. Suddenly, the room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a place where two human beings were trying to understand each other and solve a problem together. But even when things go well, difficult conversations still carry emotional waves. And now, a new wave came. Maya looked at Daniel more carefully and said, "I do need to be honest with you too." Daniel felt a small shock go through him. He straightened up. "Of course," he said. His voice was quiet. His hands tightened slightly. He was preparing himself for something harder. Maya spoke slowly, choosing each word with intention. "I felt confused last week. I sensed something was wrong, but you didn't say anything. And that made me feel a little pushed away. I felt like you didn't trust me enough to share the problem with me." Her voice was not angry. It was sincere, gentle, vulnerable. But Daniel felt the truth of her words like a soft punch to the heart. He looked down at the table. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I wasn't trying to push you away. I was afraid. I didn't want to disappoint you." Maya nodded. "I understand. But hiding something creates distance. And I value our teamwork too much to let distance grow between us." That sentence stayed in Daniel's mind. I value our teamwork. It was such a simple sentence, but it carried warmth and connection. And this is another important lesson in handling difficult conversations. People are not only talking about the problem. They are talking about the relationship around the problem. They're talking about trust. They're talking about safety. They're talking about respect. When Maya shared how she felt, she was not blaming Daniel. She was opening a window into her emotions. And when Daniel listened, he wasn't just understanding the mistake, he was understanding the impact of silence. He lifted his head and looked directly at her. "Thank you for telling me how you felt. I needed to hear that." Maya nodded again. "Good. And I'm glad you told me the truth today. That means a lot to me." There, another soft, simple sentence, but full of meaning. This shows that difficult conversations do not always break relationships. Sometimes they strengthen them. Sometimes honesty becomes the bridge that makes two people understand each other more deeply. Then something interesting happened. The tension in the room began to melt. The conversation became easier. They started discussing solutions. They talked about what steps to take next. They talked about how to prevent similar problems in the future. Their voices became smoother, more natural. They even laughed once, very softly, when Maya joked about how both of them always tried too hard to solve everything alone. And in that moment, Daniel realized something important. The hardest part of a difficult conversation is the beginning. Once the truth is spoken, once emotions are shared, once the air is clear, the rest becomes easier. The conversation becomes less about fear and more about connection. Less about mistakes and more about collaboration. Less about the past and more about the future. After they finished making a plan, Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight inside him completely gone. Not reduced, gone. He could breathe again. He could think clearly again. He could feel the ground under his feet again. But more than anything, he felt respected. He felt understood. And he felt grateful. He looked at Maya and said, "Thank you for talking with me. I know this wasn't easy." Maya smiled softly. "Difficult conversations usually aren't easy," she said. "But they're important. And you handled this with honesty. That matters." Daniel felt a warm sense of relief. He stood up slowly, and so did Maya. They walked out of the room together, side by side. And as they returned to their desks, Daniel felt different. He felt changed. He felt stronger. Because now he understood something deeply, that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is speaking even when fear is sitting right beside you. Daniel sat at his desk and took a slow, quiet breath. For the first time that day, he could feel calm spreading through his body. His shoulders relaxed. His mind felt lighter. He realized that he had been running from the conversation because he assumed it would end badly. But in reality, it didn't end badly at all. It ended with understanding. It ended with clarity. It ended with trust. And that is the magic of difficult conversations. They can turn fear into connection, confusion into clarity, distance into closeness, and mistakes into opportunities. About how quickly fear dissolves when truth enters the room. And this reflection helped him understand something new. Difficult conversations are not battles. They are bridges. Bridges that allow two people to walk toward each other instead of away. Bridges that help people understand each other's feelings, thoughts, and worries. Bridges that keep relationships alive, strong, and real. And now, I want you, the listener, to think about this too. Maybe you also have a difficult conversation waiting inside your life. Maybe you also have a truth sitting in your chest. Maybe you have something you want to say to someone, but fear is holding your voice still. If that is true, then listen closely to the lesson in Daniel's story. The moment he stopped hiding, the moment he spoke honestly, the moment he chose connection over silence, the fear began to soften. And the conversation became something healing, not hurting. As the workday ended, Daniel packed his things slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't feel anxious anymore. He felt peaceful. Outside, the sunlight was soft and warm. The sky was a gentle shade of orange. And Daniel walked toward the train station with a quiet, proud feeling inside him, not proud of being perfect, but proud of being honest. Proud of choosing the harder path. Proud of facing something he feared. And this feeling stayed with him all the way home. But the story does not end here. The real impact of a difficult conversation often shows itself afterward in the reflections, in the emotions, in the unexpected thoughts that rise later, when you are alone. And that is where we are headed next. In the next section of this long practice story, we will explore what Daniel learns from this experience, what new thoughts appear in his mind, and how this one conversation changes the way he sees communication forever. Daniel walked out of the office building into the evening light, and the world felt strangely new, as if the difficult conversation he had just faced had opened a small, quiet doorway inside him. The air felt softer. The sky looked wider. Even the sounds of traffic, which usually felt loud and stressful, now blended into the background like a gentle hum. He took a slow breath, the kind of breath that fills your lungs without effort, the kind of breath your body takes when it finally feels safe again. He stood on the sidewalk for a few moments, watching people walk past him, some moving quickly, some walking slowly, some talking on their phones, some lost in their thoughts, and he realized that everyone around him was carrying something. A worry, a fear, a responsibility, a story. And he had just taken one heavy story out of his own heart and placed it where it belonged, in a conversation, in the open, where it could breathe and change. He felt lighter, yes, but he also felt thoughtful. Something inside him was shifting, growing, learning. The storm he feared had already passed, and now he was standing in the quiet space after the rain, looking at the world with new eyes. As he walked toward the train station, Daniel replayed the conversation in his mind. He remembered the moment he finally spoke the truth. He remembered Maya's expression, calm, serious, and gentle at the same time. He remembered his own shaking hands and how slowly his voice came out. And he remembered how everything softened when he allowed himself to be honest. He realized something important. Fear does not disappear when you ignore it. Fear disappears when you walk toward it, step by step, breath by breath, word by word. He thought about all the times he had avoided hard conversations in his life, all the times he chose silence because he believed silence was safer. But now, after today, he could see that silence only protects the fear, not the relationship. Silence builds walls, and honesty builds bridges. And today, Daniel had crossed a bridge he didn't even know he could cross. The train arrived with its usual mechanical rhythm, the doors sliding open slowly. Daniel stepped inside and found an empty seat by the window. He sat down and watched the city move past him again, but this time, he felt present. Fully present. The buildings looked clearer, the people more real, the world more alive. He rested his head lightly against the window and let his thoughts rise naturally, without forcing anything. One thought kept appearing again and again. Why did I wait so long to speak? He didn't ask the question with regret. He asked it with curiosity. It was like discovering something about himself he had not seen before. He had always believed he was someone who avoided conflict because he cared about people, because he didn't want to cause pain. But now he began to understand that avoiding the truth can create more pain than speaking it. He saw that sometimes, fear of hurting someone is actually fear of facing your own emotions, fear of vulnerability, fear of imperfection, fear of disappointing someone you respect. The train continued moving, and Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered something his grandmother used to tell him when he was younger. She used to say, "Storms are not only in the sky, Daniel. Sometimes storms live inside you. And after every storm, something grows." Daniel smiled softly at the memory. Today had been a storm, an emotional storm, a storm of fear, a storm of honesty. And now he could already feel something growing inside him. It wasn't confidence exactly. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, something deeper. It was the feeling of being aligned with himself, of not hiding, of being real. That kind of feeling changes a person. It makes them walk differently, think differently, speak differently. And Daniel knew this was the beginning of something new for him. When the train reached his stop, Daniel stepped out into the cool evening air. The sky was turning a soft blue mixed with fading gold, and the streetlights were beginning to glow. He walked home slowly, feeling the ground under his feet with each step. He noticed details he usually ignored, the warm light coming from windows, the sound of a dog barking in the distance, the smell of someone cooking dinner somewhere nearby. He felt connected to the world again, as if the fear he carried all day had kept him separate from everything around him. Now that the fear was gone, he felt like he had returned to the world, like someone opening the door after staying inside for too long. Inside his apartment, Daniel placed his bag on the chair and sat down at his kitchen table. The same table where he had sat that morning, filled with worry, sipping tea with shaking hands. Now the room felt different. His shoulders were relaxed. His breathing was slow. The silence was peaceful, not heavy. He poured himself a glass of water and took a long sip. And then he began to reflect deeply, the kind of reflection that comes only after facing something difficult and surviving it. He thought about how nervous he had been, how scared he felt, how convinced he was that the conversation would go badly. He thought about how his mind had created so many imagined scenarios, each one more dramatic than the last. Yet none of those imagined fears came true. The conversation was not a disaster. The relationship did not break. The world did not collapse. Instead, something better happened, something healing. And as he sat there, Daniel realized a powerful truth. Most difficult conversations are not as dangerous as our minds make them feel. The fear is bigger than the reality. The anticipation is heavier than the moment. The imagined stories hurt more than the real words. And once we understand this, we become stronger. We become braver. We become more honest. Daniel understood that now in a way he never had before. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He asked himself quietly, "What did I learn today?" It was a simple question, but the answers felt important. He learned that honesty requires courage, but also softness. He learned that people often react better than we fear. He learned that trust is not built by perfection, but by openness. And he learned that he was capable of more strength than he believed. These were lessons he wanted to keep, lessons he didn't want to forget when the next difficult moment came. Then Daniel thought about Maya's words again, the ones that stayed in his mind like a gentle echo. "I value our teamwork." Those words meant more to him now. They were not only about the job. They were about connection, about respect, about the human side of communication. Maya had shown him something important, that difficult conversations are not something to avoid, but something to approach with care, patience, and honesty. And Daniel felt grateful for her calmness, grateful for her openness, grateful for the safe space she created during the conversation. He realized that not everyone speaks with such care, and not every difficult conversation has such a peaceful ending. But this one did. And that gave him hope for the future, hope that communication could be something gentle, something healing, something human. He sat quietly for a while, letting these thoughts settle inside him. Then he stood up and walked to his bedroom, changed into comfortable clothes, and lay down on his bed. He stared at the ceiling again, but this time with a soft, tired smile. He knew he had grown today. He knew he had taken a small step toward a stronger version of himself. And growth, he thought, often happens in the most uncomfortable moments. Growth happens when you face the thing you have been avoiding. Growth happens when you let go of fear. Growth happens when you speak the truth. Daniel closed his eyes and imagined himself in the morning. The version of him who woke up scared, anxious, heavy. He felt compassion for that version of himself. He whispered in his mind, "You did it." And that simple, silent sentence felt like a kind of healing. Because often, the person we need to comfort the most after a difficult conversation is ourselves. We need to remind ourselves that courage is real, even when it feels small. That honesty is powerful, even when our voice shakes. That growth happens quietly, like a seed under the soil, rising slowly toward the light. As Daniel drifted into a quiet rest, he thought about how this one experience would shape his future. He would not become perfect at handling difficult conversations overnight. He knew that. He would still feel nervous next time. His hands might still shake. His voice might still tremble. But he also knew something important. He would not run anymore. He would not hide behind silence. He would not let fear control his voice. Because now he had proof that he could survive honesty. He had proof that openness could strengthen relationships, not destroy them. And this proof was something he could carry with him, like a compass pointing him toward a better way of communicating. But Daniel's journey is not finished. His growth does not end here. Difficult conversations are not only about mistakes at work. They are also about personal relationships, family matters, emotional connections. And soon, Daniel will face a different kind of difficult conversation, one that is more personal, more emotional, more meaningful. A conversation with someone from his past, someone he cares about deeply. And this next conversation will test everything he learned today. In the next section, we will follow Daniel into a more intimate part of his life, where the stakes feel higher, the emotions run deeper, and the lessons become even more powerful. This will help you practice listening and understanding English in a more emotional context, while also learning how to handle sensitive communication with care. The next morning arrived quietly, with soft sunlight touching the edge of Daniel's bedroom window. He woke up slowly, as if his body was telling him he had used much of his emotional energy the day before. But this morning, his mind felt clearer, calmer, stronger. He stretched his arms above his head and took a long, deep breath. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. But then, like a gentle wave rising from far away, a new memory returned to him, a memory of a message he had ignored the night before. A message from someone he had not spoken to in weeks. Someone whose absence had created a quiet ache inside him. Someone he cared about much more than he liked to admit. Her name was Lena. And the moment her name entered his mind, the calm inside him shifted. It didn't disappear completely, but it changed shape, becoming alert, thoughtful, uncertain. Yesterday, he had handled a difficult conversation at work. But now, he felt another difficult conversation approaching, one that touched his personal life, his deeper emotions, his heart. And this conversation, he already knew, would not be easy. As he sat up in bed, Daniel reached for his phone. There it was, the message from Lena, sent late at night. "Hey, can we talk sometime this week?" A short message. A simple message. But the feelings behind it were not simple at all. Daniel and Lena had been close friends for years. But something had happened a few weeks ago, something small, but powerful enough to create distance between them. A misunderstanding. A moment of hurt. A moment of silence that grew longer and heavier with each passing day. Daniel remembered the last time they spoke. He remembered the tension in her voice. He remembered the sadness in her eyes. He remembered the way she said, "We'll talk later," even though both of them knew later might never come unless one of them had the courage to make it happen. Now Lena was reaching out. Now she wanted to talk. And Daniel, after everything he learned yesterday, knew he had to respond. He typed slowly, "Yes. We can talk today if you're free." His hands shook a little as he sent it. He sat quietly on the edge of his bed for a few moments, letting the reality settle. This conversation would be different from the one he had with Maya. With Maya, the focus was on work. The emotions were real, but the relationship was professional. With Lena, everything was personal. Everything was emotional. Everything was connected to memories, trust, friendship, shared experiences. And difficult conversations with people we care deeply about always feel more intense, more delicate, more vulnerable. Daniel felt the weight of that truth inside him. But he also felt the strength he gained from yesterday. He knew he could face fear. He knew he could speak honestly. He knew he could listen with care. And so, even though his chest felt tight, He prepared himself for the day ahead. He prepared himself for the second storm. Later that afternoon, he met Lena at a quiet cafe near the park. She was already there when he arrived, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her eyes looking out at the street in a distant, thoughtful way. When she saw him walk in, she gave a small, hesitant smile, a smile that held both relief and uncertainty. Daniel smiled back softly, trying to show her that he was ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to reconnect. He walked over to the table and sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different from the silence he experienced with Maya. This silence felt emotional, tender, filled with the presence of unsaid feelings. Finally, Lena took a quiet breath and said, "Thank you for coming." Her voice was gentle, but there was a fragile edge to it, as if she was still protecting a part of her heart. Daniel nodded. "Of course," he said. His voice was calm, careful. "I'm glad we're talking." Lena looked down at her tea for a second. Then she lifted her eyes and met his. "Daniel," she began softly, "I know things have felt strange between us lately. And I wanted to understand what happened. I wanted to talk instead of letting the distance keep growing." Her words were not sharp. They were not angry. They were full of emotion, but also full of hope. Daniel felt his throat tighten. This was the moment. This was the beginning. He remembered what he learned yesterday. Start with honesty, start with vulnerability, start with the truth. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. "I'm really sorry things became distant," he said slowly. "I didn't want it to happen. I was confused. I didn't know how to talk about what I was feeling. So I stayed quiet. And I think that silence hurt us." Lena nodded gently. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look away. She listened. Truly listened. Daniel continued, "I think the misunderstanding we had, I let it grow too big in my mind. I should have talked to you sooner. I should have asked you how you felt. But instead, I pulled away. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much and I didn't want to make things worse." His voice trembled slightly as he said this. It was the truth, the real truth, and saying it aloud made him feel exposed, vulnerable, human. Lena's eyes softened. "I know," she whispered. "I felt it. And I think I did the same thing." Daniel looked up surprised. Lena continued slowly, "I was hurt that day. Not because of what you said exactly, but because I didn't understand why you reacted the way you did. And when you didn't talk to me afterward, I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I disappointed you. Maybe you didn't want to be close anymore." Her voice shook slightly on that last sentence. Daniel felt something inside him crumble and soften at the same time. He shook his head gently. "No, Lena. You didn't do anything wrong. I never stopped caring. I was just scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of hurting you." Lena looked at him with wide, emotional eyes. "You wouldn't lose me," she said softly. "Not like that. You're important to me, Daniel." Those words hit him deeply. They carried warmth, memory, care, years of friendship. He felt his breath catch in his chest. He felt the truth of her feelings. And he realized how much unnecessary pain the silence had caused for both of them. Difficult conversations, he thought, are not only about solving problems. They're about saying the things our hearts need to hear, even if our voices tremble. They're about stepping closer, not further away. Daniel took another breath. "I think we both misunderstood each other," he said gently. "But I want to fix that. I want us to talk. I want us to understand each other again." Lena nodded slowly. "I want that too." She reached forward slightly, resting her fingertips on the edge of the table. "Can I tell you how I felt that day?" she asked. Daniel nodded immediately. "Of course. Please." Lena began to speak, choosing her words carefully. When you reacted so quickly, I felt small. I felt like you didn't trust my intentions. I felt like something broke between us. And then, when we didn't talk for so long, I started imagining things. I started believing stories that weren't true. I thought maybe you didn't want me in your life anymore. Her voice cracked at the end, just a little. Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. I'm so sorry you felt that way, he said, his voice full of sincerity. I should have talked to you. I should have explained myself. I let fear get in the way. And I hurt you without meaning to. Lena nodded again, wiping a small tear from the corner of her eye. I know you didn't mean to. And I didn't want to lose what we have. That's why I reached out. The tension in the air began to soften. The emotional storm began to settle, slowly, gently, like clouds drifting apart after a long rainfall. Daniel and Lena continued talking, not quickly, not loudly, but with slow, human honesty. They shared their misunderstandings. They shared their feelings. They shared the things they had been afraid to say. And with each sentence, the distance between them grew smaller. Understanding replaced confusion. Truth replaced fear. Connection replaced silence. There was a moment when Daniel said something important, something that changed the direction of their conversation. He said, I don't want to hide from emotions anymore. I want to talk, even when it's hard. I want us to be able to say the difficult things, not just the easy ones. I want to communicate better with you. Lena looked at him with soft, glowing eyes. Me too, she said. We're stronger together when we talk. And just like that, the second storm began to clear. The cafe felt warmer. Their voices felt calmer. Their hearts felt lighter. They began to smile again, small at first, then wider, more natural. They even laughed a little, the kind of gentle laughter that comes after tears, the kind that shows healing has already begun. After a long conversation, Daniel and Lena walked together through the park. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. The world felt quiet, peaceful, fresh. Lena walked beside him, closer than before, as if the conversation had brought them back into the same emotional space. Daniel looked ahead, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had survived 2 storms in 2 days, one at work, one in his heart. And he felt stronger because of them, not weaker. He realized that difficult conversations do not break us. They shape us. They open us. They teach us how to speak, how to listen, how to care, how to be human. But the story is not over yet. There is still something deeper for Daniel to learn. Something about communication. Something about courage. Something about the way we hold our emotions inside us. And that next step, the final transformation, is waiting in the next chapter. That night, after his long conversation with Lena and the quiet walk through the park, Daniel returned home with a calm, tender heaviness in his heart, not the heaviness of fear or confusion, but the heaviness that comes after deep honesty. The heaviness that comes when emotions have been lifted and shared and understood. His apartment felt different, softer somehow, as if the conversations of the last 2 days had changed the way he looked at every familiar object. He placed his keys on the small table near the door and walked slowly to the living room. The lights were dim, the room was quiet, and Daniel sat down on the couch as if the day were gently pressing him down, encouraging him to rest, to breathe, to reflect. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence speak to him. And in that quiet moment, he felt something unexpected, a voice inside him. Not a loud voice, not a dramatic voice, but a small, honest voice that had been waiting patiently for him to slow down. The voice said, "You're changing, Daniel. You're learning to speak. You're learning to listen. You're learning to understand yourself." And for the first time, Daniel did not run from that inner voice. He listened. He sat there for a long time, letting his thoughts move gently through his mind. He thought about the fear he had carried. He thought about the silence he had used to protect himself. He thought about the walls he had built without realizing it. And he began to understand that the most important conversations in life do not happen between two people. They happen inside you, inside your own mind, inside your own heart, inside your own fears. The conversation you have with yourself, the inner conversation, shapes every word you speak to others. If that inner voice is scared, your outer voice becomes quiet. If that inner voice is angry, your outer voice becomes sharp. If that inner voice is kind, your outer voice becomes gentle. And Daniel realized that his inner voice had been frightened for a long time. Frightened of rejection. Frightened of making mistakes. Frightened of disappointing people he cared about. That fear had shaped his silence. It had shaped his hesitation. It had shaped the way he avoided difficult moments. And now, sitting in the soft light of his living room, he understood something powerful. If he wanted to communicate better with others, he had to change the conversation he had with himself. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The room felt steady, familiar, safe. He whispered out loud, as if speaking to the person inside him, "Why are you so afraid?" And the answer came slowly, not in words, but in feelings. He felt the memory of past moments, times when he had tried to speak openly and had been misunderstood, times when he had shown his feelings and someone had dismissed them, times when he had trusted someone and had been hurt in return. These memories lived inside him like quiet shadows, shaping the way he reacted to new situations. And he understood now that these old memories were not wrong. They were not his enemies. They were simply unprocessed emotions, waiting to be seen, waiting to be understood, waiting to be healed. He sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke softly into the empty room. "It's okay. I'm here now. I'm listening." This was the beginning of the most important difficult conversation of all, the conversation he had avoided for years. The conversation with himself. He let memories rise. He let feelings appear. He didn't push them away. He didn't tell himself to be strong or forget it or move on. He let everything exist exactly as it was, without judgment. And in that gentle acceptance, something inside him loosened. Something old. Something heavy. Something that had been taking up space in his chest for too long. He remembered something from his childhood, a moment with his father. A moment when he tried to express his feelings and was told to stop overreacting. It was a simple sentence, but it had shaped years of silence inside him. He remembered another moment, in his early 20s, when he told someone he cared about how much their friendship meant to him, and they laughed awkwardly, not knowing how to respond. That moment had taught him that honesty could lead to embarrassment. He remembered a time when he tried to open up about stress, and someone told him, "You're fine. Don't make a big deal out of it." That moment had taught him that vulnerability might be dismissed. And all these moments, all these small emotional injuries, had shaped the way he spoke, or didn't speak, in his adult life. But now he was older. Now he was wiser. Now he had experienced two difficult conversations that didn't end in pain, but in connection. And those conversations became new memories, healing memories that helped balance the old ones. They showed him that honesty could be safe, that feelings could be welcomed, that vulnerability could lead to deeper relationships, not broken ones. And as he sat in his living room, Daniel realized that something inside him was changing. Something softening. Something opening. He leaned back on the couch again, letting the new understanding settle inside him like warm water spreading through his chest. He closed his eyes once more and imagined his inner voice standing beside him, not as an enemy but as a companion. A frightened companion. A loyal companion. A part of himself that only wanted protection. And he whispered softly, I won't ignore you anymore. But I won't let fear control my life either. We can speak honestly. We can listen. We can grow. That simple internal promise felt like a quiet transformation. It felt like the first step toward becoming a person who speaks with courage and listens with understanding. He opened his eyes and looked around the room again. The soft yellow light from the lamp made the space feel warm, almost gentle. His breathing felt steady. His heart felt open. He realized that he had not only repaired his relationship with Maya. He had not only reconnected with Lena. He had also reconnected with himself. And this connection, the one inside him, was the foundation for everything else. A person who understands themselves can understand others more clearly. A person who accepts their own feelings can accept the feelings of others more easily. A person who speaks kindly to themselves can speak kindly to others without fear. Daniel stood up slowly and walked to his window. Outside, the city looked peaceful. A few cars passed by. The sky was dark, but the streetlights created small golden circles on the ground. He opened the window slightly and let the cool air touch his face. He felt awake, deeply awake, in a way he had not felt in a long time. He whispered again, I'm changing, not as a question, but as a gentle fact. And the voice within him answered, yes. Keep going. He thought about everything he had learned. He thought about the power of silence, the power of honesty, the power of listening, the power of emotional courage. But most importantly, he thought about the future. He imagined himself facing the next difficult conversation, maybe with a colleague, maybe with a friend, maybe with a family member. And instead of fear, he felt something new. Not excitement, not confidence, but readiness. A calm readiness. A soft strength. A willingness to face discomfort with an open heart. He whispered to himself, next time, I won't run. And then, next time, I'll speak sooner. And then finally, next time, I will choose connection over silence. Each sentence felt like a stone placed gently inside him, building a new foundation for the person he was becoming. A foundation made of courage, truth, and emotional clarity. Daniel walked back to the couch, picked up a notebook, and opened it to a blank page. He wrote slowly, in simple words, what did I learn this week? And underneath it, he wrote, honesty heals. Silence hurts. Courage grows. Listening matters. Connection is worth the discomfort. These sentences weren't poetic. They weren't complicated. But they were true. And Daniel felt grateful for every word. As he closed the notebook, he felt a sense of completion. Not the end of a story, but the end of a chapter. A chapter about fear. A chapter about silence. A chapter about misunderstanding. Tomorrow, he thought, would be different. Tomorrow would belong to the new version of him, the version that speaks, the version that listens, the version that understands the voice within. He turned off the lamp, walked to his bedroom, and lay down under the soft covers. The room was dark, but his mind felt bright. His heart felt open. His inner voice felt calm. He whispered one last sentence before sleep found him. Thank you for staying with me, even when I was quiet. And in that quiet honesty, Daniel drifted into deep, peaceful rest. But this story has one final piece. One final lesson. One final transformation. Because understanding yourself is powerful, but using that understanding in real life, in real conversations, real conflicts, real relationships, is the final step. And that final step is waiting in the last section, where Daniel faces a moment that tests everything he has learned. The next day arrived with a quiet kind of brightness, the kind of morning where the sun does not shout but gently touches everything it meets. Daniel woke feeling rested, but also aware that something inside him had shifted. Not a small shift, not a momentary feeling, but a deep, steady change, like the movement of a river that has found a new direction. He got out of bed slowly, moved to the kitchen, and poured himself a cup of warm tea. As the steam rose toward his face, he felt a sense of readiness in his chest, a sense that today would bring something important, something that would require the new strength he had built over the past 2 days. And he was right. Because the conversation that waited for him today was not with Maya. It was not with Lena. It was with someone else. Someone who had shaped him long before he learned how to speak to colleagues and friends. Someone whose approval he had sought quietly for years. Someone whose silence had influenced the silence inside him. Today, Daniel would have to speak with his father. It began with a phone call, as many life-changing moments do. The phone vibrated on the table, and when Daniel looked down, he felt his breath pause. His father's name appeared on the screen. They weren't distant, not exactly, but their conversations had always been short, polite, practical. Not emotional. Never emotional. His father was a man of few words, a man of strong beliefs, a man who had grown up in a world where softness was a weakness and feelings were private. Growing up, Daniel felt love from him, but not in words, in actions, in gestures, in responsibilities. But as Daniel grew older, he realized he wanted more than respect. He wanted connection. He wanted to understand his father, and he wanted his father to understand him. And today, for the first time in years, his father was calling. Older, he realized he wanted more than respect. He wanted connection. He wanted to understand his father, and he wanted his father to understand him. And today, for the first time in years, his father was calling. Daniel answered with a careful hello. His father's voice came through the speaker, steady but heavy. "Daniel, can you come by the house today? I need to speak with you." The words were simple, but something inside them felt serious. Not urgent, not dramatic, but serious enough to touch something deep inside Daniel. He agreed, and after they hung up, he stood quietly in his kitchen for several minutes. The voice within him, the one he had begun to trust, whispered gently, "This is your moment." And Daniel nodded silently. Later that afternoon, he drove to his childhood home. The streets looked familiar, yet somehow different, maybe because he felt different. When he reached the house, he saw his father sitting on the porch, looking out at the garden. He looked older than Daniel remembered. Not weak, not fragile, just older. Softer somehow. More human. Daniel walked toward him, and his father looked up with a small nod that carried more emotion than he usually allowed to show. "Thanks for coming," his father said. Daniel sat beside him, the wooden porch warm under the sunlight. For a moment, there was silence, the old kind of silence, the heavy kind, the kind that had separated them for years. But Daniel didn't run from it this time. He stayed with it. He breathed through it. He let the silence be a beginning rather than a barrier. His father took a deep breath, like he was gathering courage. "I heard from your mother that things have been difficult for you lately." His voice was quiet, almost careful. Daniel blinked slowly. His mother always knew more than she pretended to know. He nodded. "Yes," Daniel said. "A lot has happened." His father nodded too, still staring at the garden. "When your mom told me, I realized something. That maybe I haven't done a good job teaching you how to talk about things." Daniel felt his heart shift suddenly, like a door opening unexpectedly. This was not something he ever expected to hear from his father. Not this man. Not in this tone. His father continued, "I taught you how to work hard, how to be responsible, how to stay calm. But talking about feelings, that wasn't something I knew how to do." He exhaled slowly. "And maybe that made things harder for you." Daniel felt a soft ache in his chest, not pain, not sadness, but relief. Pure relief. He had waited his whole life for words like these without even knowing it. He turned slightly toward his father. "It did make things harder," Daniel said gently. "But I know you did your best." His father swallowed, his jaw tense. "I did," he said. "But I also see now that my best wasn't always enough." Daniel nodded. "That's okay," he said. "We can talk now." That simple sentence, "we can talk now," seemed to soften something inside his father. He looked down at his hands, then back at the garden, then finally at Daniel. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I don't say it enough. Maybe I never said it, but I am." Daniel felt his throat close for a moment. It was a sentence he had wanted to hear for as long as he could remember. A sentence that had lived inside him like a shadow. And now, hearing it spoken aloud, he felt something inside him settle, something that had been restless for years. He took a deep breath. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice soft but steady. "That means a lot." His father nodded again, then said something even more surprising. "Your mother told me you handled a difficult situation at work. And then another with a friend. She said you didn't hide from the conversations." Daniel smiled a little. "I didn't," he said. "It wasn't easy. But I tried to be honest. I tried to listen." His father looked at him with something like admiration. "That's good," he said. "Better than I ever managed." For a moment, they sat in the warm afternoon air, father and son, two quiet men learning how to speak to each other. And then something inside Daniel gently urged him forward, the courage he had been building, the strength he had earned, the new voice he had discovered within himself. He turned fully toward his father. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. His father nodded. Daniel continued, "I used to be scared to talk to you. Not because you weren't kind, but because I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want you to think I was weak. So I kept things inside. For years." His father's expression changed, not with anger, not with pride, but with emotion. Deep emotion. "I never wanted you to feel that way," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." And in that moment, Daniel realized something powerful. Even the strongest people have their own fears. Even parents, who seem so big when we are small, carry their own quiet struggles. His father was not a man who avoided emotion because he didn't care. He avoided it because he didn't know how to show it. And understanding that made everything feel lighter. Daniel nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "And I'm not angry. I just want us to talk more. I want us to understand each other." His father breathed out a long breath, like he had been holding it for years. "I want that too," he said. "Maybe it's not too late." And right there on that porch, under the warm afternoon sky, the two of them began a conversation that lasted almost an hour. A conversation about family, about the past, about fear, about love, about everything they never had the words for. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't full of big emotional speeches. It was simple, slow, real. Two men learning the language of vulnerability. Two men discovering that honesty doesn't break relationships, honesty builds them. By the time Daniel stood to leave, he felt lighter than he had in years. He hugged his father, not tightly, not awkwardly, but naturally, like two people reconnecting across time. As he walked back to his car, he felt the late afternoon sun warming his back, and he realized something profound. All the difficult conversations of the last few days had led him to this moment. To the conversation that changed everything. Not because it solved every problem. Not because it made the past disappear. But because it opened a new future. A future where he could speak without fear. A future where he could listen without judgment. A future where he could connect, truly connect, with the people who mattered to him. On the drive home, the city looked brighter. The sky looked wider. His thoughts felt peaceful. He whispered to himself, "This is who I want to be. A person who speaks honestly. A person who listens deeply. A person who chooses connection over silence, courage over fear, truth over hiding. And that, he realized, was the real lesson of every difficult conversation: not how to win, not how to defend yourself, not how to avoid conflict, but how to stay human, how to stay open, how to stay connected even when emotions rise like storms. Difficult conversations are not obstacles. They are bridges. Bridges to understanding, to healing, to deeper relationships, and to personal growth. As he parked his car at home and stepped out into the evening air, he felt a sense of completeness settle gently inside him. He smiled, a small quiet smile, and whispered, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And the voice within him, calm, confident, steady, whispered back, "You're not just ready. You're growing."